resonance talks. Tune into learning. At resonance talks. Tune into learning. At resonance talks. Tune into learning. At resonance talks. Tune into learning. Tune into learning.
I want you to close your eyes for a second and just picture a high school hallway.
Setting the scene right away.
Exactly. But not just any hallway. I want you to transport yourself back to the year 2023.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So the bell has just rung, classes have let out, and hundreds of teenagers are flooding out of the classroom doors. But instead of that chaotic, deafening roar of voices that you probably remember from your own childhood, there's this eerie, almost unsettling silence.
Right. The classic zombie walk.
Yes, that is exactly what educators at the time grimly called it, the zombie walk. Picture it, hundreds of kids, heads tilted down at a 45-degree angle, faces just bathed in the harsh blue glow of a screen. They are totally absorbed in a digital world.
And navigating the physical space perfectly somehow.
Oh, completely perfectly, shoulder to shoulder in a crowded room, but cognitively, they are a million miles apart. It was this entirely atomized experience happening in a public space.
Which is such a stark contrast to where we are now.
Exactly. So now I want you to fast forward with me just 3 short years to the spring of 2026. Picture a high school lunchroom today.
It is loud.
It is deafening. It's chaotic. It's incredibly vibrant. You've got kids arguing passionately over sports, laughing way too loud at terrible jokes,
Making actual sustained eye contact.
navigating the messy, awkward, beautiful reality of actual human conversation. It's what educators across the country are now affectionately calling the noisy lunchroom.
It really is a profound societal shift, and what's fascinating is that it absolutely did not happen by accident.
No, it took a lot of work.
A massive amount of work. That transition from the silent, ghostly hallway to the loud, vibrant lunchroom is the direct result of one of the most aggressive, rapid, and sweeping policy shifts we have ever witnessed in the history of the American educational system.
It really wasn't just a tweak to the dress code.
No, or like a new tardiness rule. It was a complete and utter restructuring of the cognitive environment of the school.
And that unbelievable transformation is exactly what we're getting into today. Welcome to the deep dive.
Glad to be here for this one.
For this deep dive, we are pulling from an incredibly detailed, just landmark report titled The Architecture of Attention.
A comprehensive analysis of the 2026 school smartphone restriction wave.
That's the one. Our mission today is to explore exactly how 2026 became the definitive tipping point for phone-free schools in America. We are going to synthesize the massive legislative tsunamis.
The multi-million-dollar economic booms.
Yep, the hard neuroscience and the incredibly complex legal battles that made this transformation possible.
And it is absolutely vital to establish right out of the gate that this isn't just a narrow conversation about classroom management.
Right.
We aren't just talking about teachers being annoyed by ringtones interrupting a math lesson or kids hiding a device under their desk. What we are really looking at here, as the report outlines, is a much larger societal reckoning with the fractured attention economy.
The attention economy, that's a huge piece of this.
It is fundamentally about how an entire generation's cognitive development, their social skills, their mental well-being were being systemically undermined by sophisticated algorithms, and how the educational system finally, collectively, decided to push back.
And that is why this matters so deeply to you, the listener, right now. Whether you are a parent trying to navigate these new rules with your own kids, or an educator who has literally lived through this transition on the front lines.
Or honestly, just a curious mind trying to protect your own focus in a hyper-connected world.
Exactly. This deep dive is going to provide some serious aha moments. We're going to see how deeply our physical environments shape our physical brains, and how drastically human behavior can change when we proactively alter that environment.
The sheer scale of this transformation really cannot be overstated. I mean, when we look at the historical timeline of educational policy, changes usually take decades.
Oh yeah, they crawl through committees forever.
Exactly. But here we're looking at a movement that went from localized, whispered frustration in the teacher's lounge to a sweeping national mandate in the blink of an eye.
Okay, let's unpack this. The actual velocity of this change, because the numbers in this report are just staggering. I mean, how many states actually jumped on this bandwagon in such a short window?
The velocity is completely unprecedented. According to the data, by the end of just the first quarter of 2026, we saw somewhere between 41 to 44 states enact formal laws or state-level policies addressing student smartphone use.
44 states.
To get 44 states to agree on anything in a single legislative quarter is a statistical anomaly. It was a legislative tsunami.
A tsunami is the perfect word for it. But before this wave hit in 2026, it wasn't like phones were just openly celebrated in classrooms, right?
No, definitely not.
What were schools doing before these state mandates came down? Because I remember hearing about phone bans years ago.
That's a great distinction to make. For years, the approach to digital governance in schools was essentially a patchwork of localized, highly permissive guidelines. We had the classic off and away district suggestions.
Off and away?
Yeah, it was essentially left up to individual teachers or building principals to play an exhausting, endless game of whack-a-mole with devices. A teacher would tell a kid to put the phone away, the kid would slide it into their pocket, and the second the teacher turned to the whiteboard,
The phone was back out on the student's lap.
exactly.
So you basically had geometry teachers functioning as part-time security guards.
That's exactly what was happening. And what the 2026 legislative wave represents is a fundamental shift away from that. Lawmakers essentially realized that leaving this up to local district discretion, or worse, individual teacher enforcement, was setting educators up to fail.
Because they're fighting a losing battle.
You are asking a single, exhausted teacher to compete against multi-billion-dollar tech companies whose entire business model relies on hijacking that student's attention. So the shift was from localized suggestions to top-down, centralized, legally binding state mandates.
Which totally takes the pressure off the teacher. They can just say, hey, I'm not being mean, it's state law.
Exactly.
But as I was reading through the report, it seems like not all of these state mandates were created equal. The researchers break them down into two main legislative approaches, right?
Yes. The report identifies a really clear divide in how states approach the restriction. On one side, you have the really strict, uncompromising bell-to-bell leaders.
Bell to bell.
These are states that decided half measures just do not work. The policy is simple. From the moment the student walks through the front doors in the morning to the moment the final dismissal bell rings in the afternoon, the phone is inaccessible.
This includes lunch, passing periods, study halls, everything.
Everything.
And the report points out some major players here. I saw Alabama, Virginia, and New York listed as the heavy hitters for bell-to-bell.
Correct. Alabama's approach with HB 166 was particularly rigid. The law explicitly requires that devices must be completely off and stored physically away. They specifically mandated they remain in lockers or vehicles for the entire duration of the school day.
Wow, in the car.
Yeah. Virginia took a slightly different rhetorical angle with Executive Order 33. While it was still a strict bell-to-bell mandate, their governor's office explicitly framed it around student mental health.
Ah, interesting.
They were aiming to curb the incessant social media drama and cyberbullying that was peaking during the lunch hour. And New York, recognizing the financial and logistical burden of this, actually rolled their comprehensive bell-to-bell ban right into their FY 2026 state budget.
Okay, so that's the hardline approach.
Yeah.
No phones all day. What was the alternative approach that other states tried?
The alternative is what the report categorizes as instructional time bans. This was the initial approach for states like Indiana with SB 185 and Florida's early iterations with HB 379.
And what was the philosophy there?
It was a bit more compromising. The idea was to fiercely protect the actual learning environment, the classroom itself, while perhaps allowing students the autonomy to use their phones during lunch or while walking between classes.
I mean, I can see the logic there. Let the kids check their texts during a break, right? Did that compromise actually work?
The data on the ground suggests it created massive friction. What schools found was that instructional time bans just created a bottleneck of distraction.
A bottleneck.
Students were so desperate to check their notifications during the 45-minute class period that they would constantly ask for bathroom passes just to go scroll TikTok in a stall.
Oh, of course.
Or they would spend the first 10 minutes of the next class emotional dysregulated because of a text message they read during the 5-minute passing period. It was still leaking distraction into the academic day.
That makes so much sense.
Because of this, even states that started with the instructional time compromise are shifting. Florida, for instance, recently had to escalate their policy, implementing a full bell-to-bell ban for all K-8 students.
Essentially admitting the half measure wasn't protective enough for younger developing brains.
Precisely.
Wow, so the half measure just shifted the battleground to the hallways and bathrooms. But amidst all these strict bans, there was one detail in the state legislation that honestly made me laugh out loud, but is also kind of brilliant. The report highlights this incredibly specific exemption in Michigan's Public Act 2 of 2026.
Oh, yes. the basic phone carve-out.
Yes. Michigan and apparently a few other states drafting similar bills deliberately wrote in a loophole protecting what they call basic telephones.
We're talking about the old school brick phones.
Devices that are strictly technologically limited to voice calling and maybe simple SMS texting, no third-party app stores, no internet browsers, absolutely no social media algorithms, just a piece of plastic that dials a number.
Yeah.
I'm picturing kids walking around with retro Nokia 3310s or flip phones, furiously T9 texting their parents.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the profound implication of that seemingly quirky basic phone exemption cannot be ignored. It is a brilliant piece of legislative philosophy.
How so?
By legally protecting voice-only devices while simultaneously banning smartphones, lawmakers are explicitly stating what the actual threat is. They are acknowledging that human communication is not the enemy here.
Right. A student being able to call their parent to say they forgot their lunch or to coordinate a ride after practice is completely fine.
Exactly. The target, the actual defined hazard they are legislating against, is the algorithmic, social media-driven, endlessly scrolling distraction machine inherent to the modern smartphone. They surgically targeted the attention economy while preserving basic human connectivity.
It's essentially drawing a legal line in the sand between a simple communication tool and a slot machine. They are saying you can bring a tool to school, but you cannot bring a casino.
That's a great way to put it.
But here is the massive logistical reality. Once you pass a law saying thousands of kids cannot have their smartphones on them, you have to actually put those phones somewhere. And that physical reality has birthed an entirely new multi-million-dollar industry.
It certainly has.
Let's look at the phone-free economy, because enforcing these sweeping state mandates is definitely not free.
Not at all. And the reason it became an industry is because schools quickly learn a very hard lesson about human psychology. The report details what they call the complete death of the honor system.
Right, because before all this infrastructure, the rule was just keep it in your backpack. Why did that fail so spectacularly? I mean, surely a teenager can just leave a phone in a zippered pocket for an hour.
You would think so, but the report notes that schools universally concluded this honor-based backpack storage was totally ineffective, and the neuroscience explains why. Even when the phone is out of sight in a backpack, it is not out of mind.
You still feel it.
Students experience phantom vibrations. They are hyper-aware of the device sitting just inches away. The constant mental pull, the anxiety of missing a notification, drains cognitive resources even if they aren't touching the phone.
Wow.
You are asking a 14-year-old with a developing prefrontal cortex to out-willpower an algorithm that was specifically designed by thousands of the smartest engineers in Silicon Valley to hijack human attention. It's an unwinnable battle. The temptation is simply too high.
So because relying on teenage willpower completely failed, schools had to physically separate the student from the device. They needed physical enforcement barriers. And the economics of this storage infrastructure boom are absolutely wild.
The scale of the spending is massive because you aren't just buying one box, you are buying secure daily storage for hundreds, sometimes thousands of students per building.
Let's break down the major players here because one company seems to be absolutely dominating this space.
Yeah.
They make those magnetic locked pouches, right? You slide the phone in, click it shut, and the kid carries it around all day, but they can't open it until they tap it on an unlocking base at the end of the day.
Exactly. Yondr became synonymous with this movement early on. They were originally used at comic shows and concerts before pivoting heavily into the education sector.
Right.
And the report details the astronomical scale of their operations by 2026. We are looking at contracts that range from $5,000 for small independent schools, scaling all the way up to Los Angeles Unified School District LAUSD, which signed a staggering $5 million deal.
$5 million just to lock up phones in one district.
Yes.
But the part that really caught my eye was the business model. It's not just a one-time purchase, is it?
No, and that is a critical point of friction for many school boards. Yondr operates on what is essentially a leasing or subscription model.
Like software.
Exactly. For example, the report highlights the contract in New York City, where the district is paying roughly $19 per pouch per year. For a school with 1,400 students, that is a recurring annual subscription fee of over $26,000, just to maintain the pouches, replace damaged ones, and keep the unlocking bases operational.
That is wild. I mean, think about how school budgets work. Districts are out there fighting for every single dime just to buy updated history textbooks or fix leaky roofs or keep art programs funded.
Right.
And suddenly they have a $26,000 annual line item just to create a dead zone for a device the kid already owns. It was inevitable that competitors were going to swoop in and try to undercut that recurring cost.
Precisely. Whenever you have massive recurring subscription costs in a sector with tight public budgets, competitors will enter the market offering different economic models.
Who are the challengers?
The report details several stepping in. You have companies offering hard shell lockable cases like NuKase and PhoneLocker. Their entire pitch to school boards is based on a one-time purchase model. They're actively trying to help districts avoid those crushing year-over-year leasing fees.
Buy it once and you're done.
Exactly. And honestly, the report notes that a lot of schools just went back to the absolute most old school solution imaginable, traditional metal lockers.
Yes, the classic Salisbury metal lockers with combination locks.
It's fascinating to see a return to analog infrastructure. Now, these represent a much higher upfront capital investment. The report cites it at roughly $50 to $100 per student to install new locker banks in hallways or homerooms.
That's a big upfront hit.
But from a long-term budgeting perspective, the district owns that metal box forever. There are zero recurring subscription costs, and it completely removes the device from the student's physical person, which eliminates that phantom vibration distraction we talked about earlier.
Okay, but whether a school chooses the $19 a year pouch or the $100 metal locker, the upfront costs for a whole state are astronomical. Local districts can't afford this on their own.
No, they can't.
So the states that mandated these bans actually had to put their money where their mouth was. We literally had to follow the money. And the state grants dedicated to phone storage are mind-blowing.
The numbers really speak to how seriously lawmakers began taking this crisis. Pennsylvania, for instance, established a staggering $100 million fund specifically dedicated to cell phone lockup programs.
$100 million.
Think about the scale of that investment for a moment. $100 million for pouches and lockers.
It's hard to even wrap your head around. What about other states?
It was a nationwide trend. New York State earmarked $13.5 million in their FY 2026 budget to assist schools with storage solutions. And at the municipal level, in New York City alone, Mayor Eric Adams allocated $25 million specifically for the implementation of the city's distraction-free policy. Down south, Texas jumped in with a $20 million phone-free schools grant designed to financially reward and support districts that achieved full compliance with the state bans.
They are literally throwing hundreds of millions of taxpayer dollars at this problem. And you have to ask yourself why. Why would frugal state legislatures suddenly open the checkbook for metal boxes and magnetic pouches?
It comes down to the cost of doing nothing.
Because the alternative, letting the phone stay in the classroom, is now considered infinitely more costly to the students' futures and the state's eventual economy.
Exactly.
And that brings us perfectly to the core why of this entire movement, the actual science of what was happening to these kids' minds. I want to shift into the neuroscience of brain rot. Now, I have to mention, Oxford University Press actually named their word of the year for 2024, and it was brain rot.
Yes.
It started out as a joke, a meme that teenagers used on TikTok to describe how foggy and dumb they felt after staring at screens for 6 hours straight. But the report explains that there is a deeply concerning clinical reality behind that joke.
What's fascinating here is that the massive policy wave of 2026 wasn't just driven by administrators who were annoyed by classroom disruptions. It was heavily informed by hard, undeniable neuroscience.
Let's dig into that.
The report dives deeply into the mechanics of the attention economy. This is the reality that these digital platforms, these social media apps, treat human focus as a scarce natural resource. It is something to be aggressively, algorithmically extracted and monetized for ad revenue.
Focus is the product.
Right. And the crucial point is that adolescent brains, which are still actively developing their prefrontal cortex, the area responsible for executive function, impulse control, and long-term planning, are uniquely and disproportionately vulnerable to this extraction.
Because they're still wiring themselves.
Exactly.
Right.
It all comes down to the dopamine-scrolling loop and something called variable reinforcement schedules.
Okay, I want to slow down here because I think a lot of us use the word dopamine pretty loosely. Like, I ate a donut, I got a dopamine hit.
Right, everyone says that.
But what is the actual clinical mechanism happening in a 14-year-old's brain when they are sitting in the back of a classroom, just endlessly scrolling and swiping through 15-second short-form videos?
It's a very precise mechanism that revolves around what neuroscientists call reward prediction error. As you mentioned, dopamine is widely misunderstood by the public as simply a pleasure chemical.
Okay.
But clinically, it is a learning and motivation chemical. It specifically signals the difference between what your brain expects to happen and what actually happens.
Okay, give me an example of how that works when a kid is holding a phone.
Let's say a student is scrolling, they swipe up to a new video. If that video is funnier, more shocking, or more stimulating than they subconsciously anticipated, meaning the outcome is better than expected, their brain registers a positive reward prediction error.
And boom, dopamine.
Yes, it releases a massive spike in dopamine. This spike powerfully reinforces the swiping behavior, burning the neural pathway that says swiping equals reward.
Right. But what happens when the next video is boring?
That is the insidious part, because the content feed is variable. Sometimes the video is boring, sometimes it's okay, and sometimes it's amazing. It creates a variable reinforcement schedule.
Like a slot machine.
This is the exact same psychological mechanism used in casino slot machines. The brain never knows when the big jackpot video is coming. Because of that unpredictability, the ultimate reward is always perceived to be just one scroll away.
Just one more.
This traps the student in a perpetual state of hyper-engagement, constantly seeking that next unexpected dopamine spike.
It is genuinely terrifying when you realize that intense slot machine level neurological loop is happening silently while a teacher is trying to explain the periodic table. How can a teacher possibly compete with a personalized casino? But according to the report, the damage goes deeper than just immediate distraction. There's a physiological changing of the brain. The report references a major 2024 study by Zhang et al. That explores a concept called cognitive offloading. I found this absolutely mind-blowing.
Cognitive offloading is an incredibly dangerous behavioral habit where a person subconsciously outsources their memory and their active problem-solving capabilities to an external device.
Basically making the phone do the work.
If you don't have to remember a historical fact because you can instantly search for it, or if you don't have to mentally calculate a math equation because the phone does it instantly, or if you don't have to navigate a route because GPS tells you every turn, the neural pathways responsible for those internal cognitive abilities begin to weaken from disuse.
It's like a muscle atrophy. If you put your arm in a cast for 6 months, it shrivels up.
Exactly. You are literally outsourcing your brain power, your working memory, to the smartphone. Over time, as the Zhang study demonstrates, this leads to measurable cognitive atrophy. The brain adapts to be efficient. If it knows the smartphone is holding the information, it refuses to expend the energy to encode that information into long-term memory.
And when you combine that chronic cognitive offloading with the endless dopamine scrolling we just talked about, you get the actual clinical symptoms of what the kids call brain rot. The report lists a few major measurable symptoms that schools were seeing in mass quantities. The first one is impaired focus.
Yes. The researchers note that frequent daily exposure to these 15 to 30-second bursts of hyper-stimulating information physically trains the brain to expect rapid stimuli. The brain's baseline for stimulation is raised artificially high.
So real life feels slow.
As a result, any task that requires more than a single minute of sustained focus, like reading a chapter in a physical book, or listening to a teacher explain a nuanced concept, or even having a slow conversation, begins to feel, quote, excruciatingly dull.
Wow.
The brain literally perceives normal, real-world pacing as painful boredom.
Excruciatingly dull. That breaks my heart for the teachers trying to share their passion for a subject. But the impacts aren't just academic. The report highlights severe emotional and physical health symptoms as well.
Emotional desensitization is a massive factor. When a developing brain is constantly exposed to hyper-stimulating, high-velocity digital content, which often includes outrage, extreme pranks, or highly polarized social dynamics, it can lead to a documented lack of empathy.
Because they've seen everything on a screen.
The constant barrage strips away the brain's ability to process emotional nuance in the real world. Real-world interactions feel muted compared to the extreme highs and lows of the algorithm.
And then there's the physical toll, specifically regarding sleep.
The physical impact on sleep and circadian rhythms is perhaps the most quantifiable damage. Late-night digital engagement with these light-emitting devices contributes heavily to melatonin suppression in teenagers.
Because of the blue light.
The blue light tricks the pineal gland into thinking it is daytime. This results in chronic sleep debt across the entire student body, which in turn further impairs memory formation, emotional stability, and executive function the very next day at school. It becomes a vicious, compounding cycle of exhaustion and cognitive impairment.
I want to pause here for a second and ask you, the listener, to reflect on your own habits. Forget the teenagers for a minute. Think about your own adult brain.
Right.
Think about the last time you outsourced a simple memory task to your phone. Like trying to remember a friend's new phone number, or trying to navigate to a restaurant you've actually been to before. You probably used GPS without even thinking about it.
I do it all the time.
And think about how a 10-minute read of a magazine article feels today compared to how it felt 10 or 15 years ago, especially if you try to read it right after you spend an hour watching short-form videos on the couch.
It's hard.
If we, as fully formed adults with fully developed prefrontal cortices, are feeling that intense friction and distraction, Try to imagine being a 14-year-old flooded with hormones, trying to sit through a 50-minute history lecture on the Industrial Revolution. It is an impossible ask. It's no wonder the educational system had to intervene. They weren't just taking away a toy, they were trying to stop a public health crisis.
That is the exact framing that led to the 2026 mandates. And the incredible part is that this intervention brings us to the actual measurable results. We aren't just operating on theories or pilot programs anymore.
We have the data.
By the end of 2026, we have incredibly robust, hard data on what actually happens when you legally and physically sever that dopamine loop during the 7 hours of the school day.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Let's look at the data. We have spikes, we have recoveries, and we have the return of the noisy lunchroom. The report heavily highlights a landmark working paper by David Nfiglio and Umut Ezek.
Yes, the Florida study.
This is the massive NBER Florida study analyzing data from the 2025 and 2026 school years. They analyzed a massively large, diverse Florida district that went all in on an uncompromising all-day bell-to-bell ban. And the initial findings from the first month, well, let's just say they were pretty rough.
They were brutal. The report details what researchers call the disciplinary spike. In the first month of implementing this comprehensive ban, student suspensions in this Florida district rose by an astounding 25%.
25%.
Yeah.
That is a massive jump in kids getting sent to the office.
It is, but context is crucial here.
Yeah.
You have to understand the psychological reality of the situation. You are taking a highly addictive device, a device that has managed their dopamine levels for years away from an adolescent population cold turkey.
They're not going to be happy about it.
The students vehemently tested the new boundaries. There was defiance. There were screaming matches over confiscated phones. There was intense friction. It was a deeply painful transition period for administrators and teachers who had to stand their ground and enforce the new reality.
Yeah.
It was, in clinical terms, a mass withdrawal event.
A mass withdrawal event. That paints such a vivid picture of what principals were dealing with in September of 2025. But the crucial, hopeful part of the Filio and Ozek study is what happened after that painful withdrawal period. They tracked the data into what they categorize as the year 2 recovery.
Yes. By the second year of the ban, a profound cultural shift had occurred. Those disciplinary incidents, that massive 25% spike, dropped completely back down and returned to pre-ban baselines.
Wow.
The friction disappeared because compliance simply became the new normal. The upperclassmen who fought the ban graduated, and the incoming freshmen just accepted that this is how high school works. The withdrawal period ended.
And once that culture shifted, once the dust settled and the phones were actually gone, the academic and behavioral triumphs became absolutely undeniable. Let's talk about the test scores, because this is what school boards care about.
The academic gains were significant. The study found that standardized test scores rose by an average of 1.1 percentiles in the second year of the policy.
This is a lot.
Now, in the realm of massive educational interventions, moving a district-wide average by 1.1 percentiles is a massive achievement. Furthermore, that improvement was not distributed evenly. It was most heavily concentrated among male students, as well as middle and high schoolers.
The ones most distracted by screens.
Demographics that historically struggle the most with screen-based distraction.
But the report digs deeper into why the scores went up. And it wasn't just because kids were paying better attention in math class. What was the hidden driver behind that academic bump?
This is one of the most insightful findings of the NBER paper. The researchers noted that unexcused absences, kids flat out skipping class, dropped significantly under the phone-free policy.
Less truancy.
The researchers estimate that this sudden improvement in attendance actually accounts for roughly half of that entire 1.1 percentile test score bump.
That makes total logical sense when you think about it. If you have your phone, skipping class to go sit in the back stairwell or bathroom stall and scroll TikTok is highly entertaining.
Definitely.
But if the phone is locked in a pouch or a metal locker in the front office, sitting in a bathroom stall staring at a tile wall for 45 minutes is excruciatingly boring.
Yeah.
You might as well just go to algebra class.
Exactly. The phone was the primary incentive for truancy. Remove the phone, and you remove the reward for skipping class.
And that beautifully practical reality brings us back to that visceral sensory image we started this deep dive with, the noisy lunchroom phenomenon. The report pulls qualitative data from the Phones in Focus initiative, which is a massive project that surveyed an incredible 68,000 educators nationwide after these bans took effect. The results they got back are genuinely heartwarming.
The consensus was overwhelming. Of the 68,000 educators surveyed, 93% explicitly noted increased positive student interactions during lunch and unstructured times.
93%. You can't get 93% of people to agree that the sky is blue, but they agree on this.
Yeah.
And the qualitative feedback, the actual quotes, from these educators paint such a vivid auditory picture.
The educators described how hallways and lunchrooms that were previously defined by that zombie-like silent scrolling we discussed earlier were radically transformed. They are now characterized by loud, messy, authentic, energetic conversation.
I love that.
Teachers explicitly used phrases to the researchers like, "The kids are learning to socialize again." They are reclaiming the fundamental human experience of face-to-face peer interaction, reading body language, and navigating real-time social conflict and resolution without hiding behind a screen.
It's just a beautiful image of reclaiming humanity in these institutional spaces. But as with any massive systemic policy shift that affects millions of families, there are deeply complex, highly sensitive challenges that emerged. The transition wasn't just about test scores and ampy lunchrooms.
No, not at all.
This brings us to a deeply sensitive debate, and it's one where parents, lawmakers, and safety experts are looking at the exact same physical device and seeing two completely valid yet diametrically opposing realities. We need to talk about the safety paradox, balancing the concept of the phone as a vital lifeline versus the phone as a severe tactile hazard during school emergencies. And I want to be incredibly clear here to you, the listener. We are going to impartially report the findings from the source text without endorsing either side, because this is the most contentious, emotionally charged debate surrounding the entire phone-free movement.
It absolutely is. The question of student safety during an active crisis or lockdown is incredibly fraught, and the report outlines how both sides of this argument are rooted in a deep, fundamental desire to protect children.
Let's start by unpacking the parental perspective because it is incredibly powerful. The report outlines the public stance of massive advocacy groups like the National Parents Union. From their viewpoint, completely banning phones is considered an unreasonable and terrifying demand in the modern era of school shootings.
For many parents, the smartphone functions as a digital umbilical cord. The psychological comfort of knowing they can instantly reach their child is profound. The report explicitly cites the tragic 2018 Parkland shooting to illustrate this perspective.
It's a heavy example.
During that horrific event, students tragically but effectively used their smartphones to document crucial evidence, to communicate real-time locations to authorities, and heartbreakingly, to contact their loved ones to say final goodbyes.
Yeah.
The core argument from these parental advocacy groups is that simply knowing the phone is in their pocket provides a necessary emotional security baseline for the student. They argue that this baseline of security actually reduces ambient student anxiety, allowing them to focus better on a daily basis. To take that away feels like stripping them of their only lifeline.
It is an entirely understandable, visceral reaction from a parent. I need to know my kid is safe.
This raises an important question, though, when you pivot and look at the exact same situation from the tactical perspective of law enforcement and crisis management professionals. The report extensively details the guidelines published by the National Association of School Resource Officers, or NASRO, alongside independent tactical safety experts.
And what do they say?
Their analysis concludes that in an active shooter or lockdown scenario, a smartphone is not a lifeline. It is a severe, potentially fatal tactical liability. They identify 5 critical risks.
Let's walk through those 5 risks from NASRO because they completely flip the narrative on how we view these devices during an emergency. What is the first major risk?
The first is auditory and visual exposure. The cardinal rule of a school lockdown is silence and darkness. In that terrifying scenario, a vibrating phone, a sudden ringtone, or the sudden bright glow of a screen illuminating a dark classroom can inadvertently reveal a student's hiding spot to an assailant roaming the hallway.
A screen lighting up in the dark is like a beacon. That is terrifying. What is the second risk?
The second risk NASRO identifies is instructional interference. The concern here is psychological bandwidth. If students are in a state of panic, hyper-focused on texting their parents or checking social media for updates, their attention is entirely consumed by the device.
They aren't listening.
Consequently, they are physically and mentally distracted from hearing and following real-time, life-saving directions from the teachers or SWAT officers actually in the room with them.
They are listening to a rumor on X instead of the police officer at the door. Okay, what about the third risk? This one blew my mind because I had never thought about the infrastructure side of an emergency.
Third is network overload. This is a massive logistical failure point. If an emergency occurs at a high school of 2,000 students, and suddenly thousands of kids simultaneously attempt to make cellular calls, send high-definition videos, or live stream the event, it requires massive bandwidth.
Like at a crowded concert when your phone stops working.
Exactly like that. This sudden spike can and has completely overwhelmed and crashed local cellular towers. This network failure critically hinders the ability of emergency first responders, police, fire, paramedics to communicate and coordinate their own rescue efforts.
The kids' texts to their parents are literally blocking the police radios. That is a massive paradox. And that ties directly into the fourth risk, which NASCRO calls parental flocking.
Exactly. Frantic, terrifying texts sent from inside the school naturally cause terrified parents to drop whatever they are doing and rush directly to the campus. This is human nature.
Of course.
However, tactically, the sheer volume of civilian traffic and frantic crowds completely blocks access roads. This prevents emergency vehicles, ambulances, and armored police units from actually getting to the building to neutralize the threat or extract the wounded, while simultaneously placing the unarmed parents themselves in a chaotic and highly dangerous active perimeter.
And finally, the fifth risk.
The fifth risk is the rapid spread of misinformation. Social media posts, videos, and text rapidly uploaded during a crisis are often incomplete or entirely inaccurate. They spread rumors about multiple shooters, incorrect locations, or false hostage situations,
Making it harder for the police.
this causes secondary panic in the wider community and severely complicates law enforcement efforts. The command center has to waste precious time and resources trying to separate viral fiction from factual, tactical reality in real time.
Again, deeply emotional, incredibly high-stakes perspectives on both sides. You have the psychological terror of the parent versus the cold, hard, tactical reality of the SWAT team. And safety isn't the only incredibly complex frontier that schools are having to navigate here.
No, it leads right into the legal sphere.
Right. This takes us into the legal and constitutional frontiers of the phone-free movement. Because as these strict bell-to-bell mandates become the national standard, it is absolutely inevitable that they are facing a wave of litigation. You can't separate millions of Americans from their property without a few lawsuits. And again, just want to remind you, the listener, we are reporting on these legal and equity challenges neutrally, conveying the arguments straight from the source text.
That is a guarantee in the American legal system. The legal battles outlined in the report are heavily focused on constitutional boundaries, specifically privacy, property rights, and freedom of expression. The most prominent example the researchers dissect is a massive Fourth Amendment battle currently playing out in the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals.
Let's slow down and really dig into this one because the legal nuance here is fascinating. The case is OWV Carr. Set the scene for us. What actually happened?
The case involves a 13-year-old middle school student. The student was suspected of a school rule violation, and their smartphone was confiscated by a teacher. However, the situation escalated when school administrators, eventually joined by a school resource police officer, proceeded to unlock and actively search through the digital contents of the student's phone.
Wait, they looked through the phone?
Yes, their text messages, photos, social media apps, all without obtaining a legal warrant from a judge.
Okay, so a warrantless search of a digital device. How does the school defend doing that? Because if the police pull me over, they can't just take my phone and read my texts without a warrant.
The school's legal defense relies heavily on an older, incredibly important Supreme Court precedent known as New Jersey VTLO. This case, decided back in 1985, basically established that the school environment is unique.
How so?
To maintain a safe and orderly educational environment, school officials do not need probable cause or a warrant to search a student's physical property, like a backpack or a locker. They only need what is called reasonable suspicion that a rule is being broken.
Interesting.
The school in OWV Carr is arguing that a smartphone is simply modern student property, no different than a trapper keeper or a backpack, and therefore falls under the TLO standard of reasonable suspicion.
It's just a digital backpack.
Yeah.
Okay, but I'm guessing the civil liberties groups completely disagree with that comparison.
Absolutely. The challenge brought by civil liberties groups, specifically the ACLU and EPIC, the Electronic Privacy Information Center, argues that a smartphone is fundamentally technologically different from a physical backpack. To make their case, they are demanding the application of a much more recent Supreme Court decision, Riley v. California from 2014.
What did the Riley case establish?
The Riley decision was a landmark ruling where the Supreme Court unanimously recognized that a modern smartphone contains a massive, unprecedented, and deeply intimate amount of private data. It holds your location history for years, your banking data, your private medical search queries, thousands of photos, and personal communications.
It's your whole life.
Because of this massive privacy footprint, the court in Riley established that police absolutely require the stricter probable cause warrant standard before a phone can be searched incident to an arrest.
Okay, I see the conflict now.
So the core conflict in OWV Carr is a collision of these two precedents. Does the schoolhouse gate strip a student of the strict digital privacy protections established in Riley? Or does a smartphone contain so much sensitive data that it exempts itself from the lowered bar of the school's TLO backpack search standard? It is a fascinating constitutional gray area.
It really is. And speaking of bizarre legal conflicts and gray areas, the report brings up another incredibly specific, almost funny loophole regarding adult student property rights. And this explicitly looks at a situation in the Los Angeles Unified School District, LAUSD.
This one is quite the headache for administrators.
LAUSD, like many districts, has a strict confiscation policy. The rule states that if a phone is confiscated during the day for a violation, a parent or guardian must physically come to the school's front office during business hours to retrieve it. The student cannot get it back themselves. But what happens when the student is a senior and they turn 18 years old?
It creates a completely absurd but very real legal paradox. Once a student turns 18, they are recognized under state and federal law as a legal adult. They are technically and legally their own guardian.
Right.
They can vote, they can sign a contract, they can join the military. So active litigation and pushback from student rights advocates are questioning whether a public school district has the legal authority to withhold personal expensive property from a legal adult after school hours.
Right. If a 30-year-old teacher gets their phone confiscated by the principal, they get it back at 3.15. So if an 18-year-old adult student walks into the office at 3:15 p.m., demands their $1,000 piece of personal property back, and the school secretary refuses to hand it over because your mommy hasn't arrived yet, does that constitute an unlawful seizure of property by a government entity?
It is a massive logistical headache for school administrators, and it perfectly exposes the deep friction that occurs when rigid, broad-stroke school policies collide with the nuanced realities of constitutional rights and adult legal status.
It's amazing how a simple put your phone away rule unravels into constitutional law.
Yep.
But there's another deeply concerning layer to this enforcement friction that goes far beyond constitutional technicalities. We need to look at equity and racial disparities, because who is getting their phone taken away and how they are punished for it isn't always equal.
This is a critical point of analysis in the report. The researchers go back to the demographic data from that massive 2025 Figlio and Ozick study in Florida that we discussed earlier. Remember that 25% disciplinary spike, the massive wave of suspensions that hit the district in the first month of the ban.
Right, the withdrawal period where kids were testing the boundaries and getting suspended.
Well, when the researchers broke down that suspension data demographically, the numbers were deeply concerning. The data shows that the disciplinary spike disproportionately impacted Black students. Specifically, the study found that Black male students experienced a staggering 30% increase in in-school suspensions during that first year of implementation, which was significantly higher than the baseline average.
30%. That is a massive demographic outlier. What do the experts attribute that gap to?
Sociologists and educational equity experts highlight this as a significant enforcement gap. The concern raised in the report is that these sweeping zero-tolerance policies do not exist in a vacuum. They are deployed into existing social structures.
So the context of the school matters.
In school environments that are historically over-policed or have a history of implicit bias in disciplinary actions, marginalized students, specifically Black youth, may view and directly experience these phone bans as just another avenue for pretextual disciplinary action.
Meaning the phone ban just becomes another excuse to suspend a kid that the system already targets.
Precisely. If a teacher has unconscious bias, they might ignore a white student quickly checking a text, but heavily penalize a Black student for the exact same infraction. It introduces a massive, deeply troubling equity variable into how these well-intentioned policies are actually carried out on the ground.
Which perfectly transitions us to the next massive section of the report. Because as we just saw with that deeply concerning equity data, how you choose to enforce the ban on Tuesday afternoon is just as impactful as the law the governor signed on Monday morning. Let's look at implementation logistics. The report shifts its focus to how this is actually working on the ground in 2026, highlighting the Houston Independent School District, or HISD, as the national model for a rigid, uncompromising enforcement framework.
The mechanics of the ban in HISD are, frankly, intense. They decided that ambiguity was the enemy of compliance, so they implemented an escalating penalty framework that leaves virtually no room for negotiation or letting it slide.
It's very structured.
It is a draconian, incredibly strict five-strike system. It is specifically designed to make the social and academic cost of non-compliance exceptionally high for the student.
Let's break down this five-strike system, because reading this, I was genuinely in shock that this is happening in a public high school setting. Let's say a kid gets caught with their phone. First offense.
First offense. The device is confiscated, held securely by the school until the end of the day, and a parent or guardian must retrieve it. It's an inconvenience, but pretty standard stuff.
Okay, a warning shot. But then the kid gets caught again a month later. Second offense.
Second offense. The phone is confiscated for 7 entire school days. The student does not have access to their device during school hours for over a week.
Okay, that's a massive escalation. Third offense.
Third offense, the confiscation period jumps to 14 school days.
2 weeks without the phone. Fourth offense.
Fourth offense, the device is confiscated for a full 30 school days, over a month of the academic calendar.
And if, God forbid, a student is completely defiant and hits a fifth offense,
A fifth offense removes the issue of the phone entirely because it triggers a mandatory placement of the student at a disciplinary alternative education campus for 10 days.
they're literally sent to an alternative disciplinary school for having a phone 5 times. The reality of that enforcement is just staggering. If a student is a repeat violator and hits that fourth offense, they could effectively lose access to their personal device, their connection to their friends, their music, their life for an entire semester.
This is a very heavy consequence.
I remember being grounded as a kid and losing the TV for a weekend and feeling like the world was ending. 30 days is a lifetime to a teenager.
It is a massive deterrent. But to support this rigid framework, HISD understands that they can't just rely on punishments, that they have to proactively remove the temptation. So they enforce a strict physical rule. All devices must be powered entirely off and secured deep inside backpacks from the absolute moment of arrival on campus until the final dismissal bell rings. This completely covers lunch, passing periods, and gym class. But we have to look at the administrative reality of this 5-strike system. The burden of tracking, physically storing, and legally securing hundreds of expensive $1,000 devices for 14-day or 30-day periods is an entirely new, monumental logistical challenge for the school's front office staff.
I didn't even think about the staff.
You have school secretaries who used to just answer phones and Band-Aid scraped knees, who are now essentially acting as bank tellers, managing highly secure vaults of confiscated electronics, dealing with furious parents who demand their property back.
It really highlights the central theme of this report. Winning the phone battle requires fighting a massive logistical war. You need safes, you need spreadsheets, you need state funding, and you need ironclad policies.
Absolutely.
But here is the ultimate plot twist of the 2026 restriction wave. Even with Houston's incredibly strict 5-strike system, even with the $100 million in metal lockers, the war for student attention isn't actually over. And that brings us to our final section, the future outlook, the next challenge. Because the report notes a massive, glaring irony. Winning the battle against the smartphone didn't end the attention war because there was a massive loophole sitting right on the students' physical desks. They call it the digital leak.
Yes, the issue of one-to-one school-issued laptops and Chromebooks. This is the great paradox of the modern classroom. Educators in 2026 are now estimating that roughly 1 in 3 students are using these state-provided, taxpayer-funded laptops for non-academic purposes right in the middle of a lecture.
They're just adapting.
They are using split screens to text via web apps. They are playing browser-based games. They are accessing social media through VPNs. The irony here is profound. A district can spend years of political capital passing mandates and build a multi-million-dollar infrastructure of Yondr pouches and metal Salisbury lockers to successfully lock away a 6-inch smartphone. But they absolutely cannot lock away a required 13-inch curricular device. The educational system spent the last decade mandating these laptops for digital learning, and now they have inadvertently provided the new conduit for the attention economy.
It's like spending millions to plug one tiny hole in a massive dam, only to watch the water instantly burst through another hole right next to it. They took away the casino in their pocket and handed them a casino in their backpack.
That's very true.
But the impact of these laptops goes far beyond a kid just secretly playing Minecraft during a biology lecture. The report circles back to that 2024 Zhang et al. Study, the one involving 300 university students that we mentioned, regarding cognitive offloading. But here, they apply it to the concept of AI dependency. And this is where the conversation completely shifts from distraction to something much more existential.
What's fascinating here is that the integration of artificial intelligence into these school-issued devices has moved the academic debate completely beyond the traditional old-school concept of cheating.
Cheating was the old worry.
Right. In the past, if a student used a device to secretly look up an answer to a trivia question, it was a simple academic integrity issue. But the Zhang study shifts the focus to something far more insidious: cognitive atrophy. When students become fundamentally dependent on generative AI and smart devices to do the heavy lifting of writing, researching, and calculating, it fundamentally alters their cognitive development.
How bad is it?
The researchers identified 5 primary measurable negative consequences of this deep AI dependency, and they paint a deeply worrying picture of the future knowledge worker.
Let's really detail those 5 consequences, because I feel like this list perfectly summarizes the incredibly high stakes of this whole deep dive. The first consequence researchers found is increased laziness.
Right. And they don't mean laziness in the sense of not wanting to do chores. The study defines this clinically as a decreased willingness to engage in effortful, sustained inquiry. Why would a student struggle for 3 hours through a complex, frustrating math problem or read a dense historical text when the AI will spit out a synthesized, perfectly formatted answer in 2 seconds?
You lose the struggle.
The friction of learning is removed, but friction is required to build neural pathways.
No friction, no growth. Okay, the second consequence is decreased creativity.
When students rely on algorithmic outputs to generate their initial ideas, asking AI to write the outline of an essay or brainstorm project topics, they stop exercising their own creative muscles. They are no longer creating from scratch. They're simply curating and editing the machine's thoughts. The spark of human originality is outsourced.
The third consequence.
The third consequence is reduced critical thinking. The constant reliance on quick, neatly synthesized answers diminishes a student's ability to analyze complex, contradictory information, weigh differing viewpoints, and synthesize their own original conclusions. If the machine always provides the summary, the brain forgets how to summarize.
Which naturally bleeds into the fourth consequence, which is reduced independent thinking.
Closely related, but distinct. This is the danger of outsourcing decision-making and judgment entirely to digital tools. It's the phenomenon where a student begins to implicitly trust the algorithm's judgment, its tone, and its conclusions over their own intuition, moral reasoning, and life experience. They become intellectually passive.
And finally, the fifth consequence, which feels like the biggest societal threat of all: misinformation.
With drastically reduced critical thinking and independent thought comes a severe, dangerous lack of scrutiny regarding the validity of online content. If you are accustomed to the AI always being right, you stop fact-checking. Students become passive receptacles for whatever information the machine feeds them, fundamentally unable to discern verified fact from algorithmic fiction or targeted propaganda.
So what does this all mean? We have journeyed through an incredible, multifaceted societal shift today. We have thoroughly unpacked how 2026 became the definitive, undeniable year that the American educational system finally stood up and fought back against the multi-trillion-dollar attention economy.
We covered a lot of ground.
We saw how states realized the failure of the honor system and moved from polite, localized suggestions to sweeping top-down legislative mandates. We explored the massive multi-million-dollar economy of magnetic pouches and metal lockers.
And the science behind it all.
We dug deep into the brutal neuroscience of dopamine slot machines, reward prediction errors, and the cognitive atrophy of brain rot. We examined the deeply painful disciplinary spikes and mass withdrawals that schools had to endure, and the incredibly complex constitutional and safety paradoxes they had to navigate, all to finally get back to that beautifully chaotic, vibrant, noisy lunchroom where kids are actually looking each other in the eye and talking to each other again.
It is a powerful testament to the fact that while technology undeniably shapes our behavior and our neurology, deliberate policy and intentional physical environments can still shape how we use that technology. The smartphone bandwave of 2026 isn't just a niche story about school administrative rules. It's a massive, hopeful story about human agency proactively reclaiming cognitive space for the next generation.
And that leads me to a final lingering thought for you, the listener, to ponder as you go about your day. We've just seen the hard data. K-12 schools have successfully proven that forced, physical, mandated separation from our addictive devices is perhaps the only effective way to reclaim human cognitive space, improve mental health, and foster real, authentic connection.
True.
So, if it works so undeniably well for teenagers, how long will it be until adults start looking at their own exhausted, burned-out lives, start demanding these exact same phone-free mandates and noisy lunchrooms at our own corporate workplaces, our own boardrooms, and our own homes? Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Stay curious, protect your attention out there, and we will see you next time.
Edu Resonance Talks. Tune in to learn. Edu Resonance Talks. Tune in to learning. Edu Resonance Talks. Tune in to learning. Edu Resonance Talks. Tune Resonance Talk.